I never fully understood how clearly my family had placed me in a hierarchy until my mother said it plainly during dinner. She was not upset. She was not emotional. She was calm, steady, almost neutral when she explained that my sister's family would always come first and that I would always come last. My father nodded as if she had just solved a simple equation. My sister lowered her eyes into her glass, a small satisfied smile touching her lips. I did not cry. I did not argue. I did not demand clarification. I simply responded that it was good to know. Because in that moment, something inside me shifted. It was not heartbreak. It was loyalty that finally gave way. Before I explain what happened next, pause for a second. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share where you are listening from. And think about this honestly. Have you ever discovered that you ranked last in your own family? My name is Celine. For most of my life, I absorbed my place without anyone formally explaining it to me. There were no lectures. No written household rules taped to the refrigerator. Just patterns. Quiet ones. The kind that shape you long before you realize they are doing it. I grew up in a house in Denver that looked completely ordinary from the street. The lawn was trimmed. The paint was neutral. Family photographs framed the entryway. It looked stable. It looked balanced. But inside, attention had a direction. If you paid close enough attention, you could feel how it moved. It flowed quickly and generously toward one person. By the time it reached me, it had slowed, thinned, nearly disappeared. My sister carried a gravity I did not. Conversations curved naturally toward her needs. Plans adjusted themselves around her schedule. When she struggled, everyone mobilized immediately. When she succeeded, the celebration was loud and proud. I understood early that my role was different. I was the one who did not require much. The one who could manage. The dependable one. People called me strong as if it were praise, though it often felt more like a quiet warning to keep handling everything alone. I was not unloved. That is what makes it complicated. I was loved in reassurance, in theory, in statements that sounded supportive. I often heard that I would be fine and that I was so independent. It sounded generous. But hidden inside those words was a condition that no one needed to spell out. Do not ask for more. Do not take up too much space. Do not need us the way she does. The differences revealed themselves in small details. On birthday mornings, my cake was picked up from the grocery store on the way home, while hers had been ordered weeks ahead. On family vacations, my suitcase sometimes stayed in the closet because saving for school made more sense for me. During graduations, I often stood to the side taking photographs for everyone else, holding coats, watching milestones unfold without being centered in them. When I left for community college, there were no tears at an airport terminal. In fact, there was no airport at all. Just a brief hug in the driveway and a reminder to call when I arrived. I paid my own tuition. I worked extra shifts. I learned to stretch both money and time because I had to. Each success quietly strengthened the story my parents told themselves. She is fine, she does not need us. Years later, when I moved to Seattle for work, the pattern followed me. Phone calls stayed short. Updates about my life were acknowledged politely before the conversation shifted. They would ask about work, listen to my answer, and then quickly move on to whatever my sister was facing at the time. I became fluent in listening, in supporting, in staying steady while my own life unfolded somewhere off to the side. By the night of that dinner, when my mother finally spoke the truth aloud, I already understood where I stood. What startled me was not the ranking itself. It was the comfort with which they said it, as though it had always been obvious, as though I had agreed to it long ago. Perhaps in some quiet way I had. After that dinner, nothing changed outwardly. And that was exactly the point. My parents did not call to check in. My sister did not apologize. Life continued smoothly, uninterrupted, as if the quiet truth had not just been spoken. But something inside me had shifted. The requests continued exactly as before. A message from my mother asking if I could watch the children for a few hours. A casual mention of bills stacking up, said lightly, almost like small talk about the weather. My sister forwarding a notification about a payment that had bounced, softened with a laughing emoji. No one asked directly. They never needed to. The expectation carried enough weight. I started noticing how automatic my old responses had been. Of course I will handle it. Do not worry about it. I will make it work. This time I did not respond immediately. At first it felt wrong, as though I were breaking an invisible rule that had always governed me. When my phone lit up, I felt the familiar pull in my chest, the instinct to fix things before they grew complicated. Instead, I let the phone remain on the counter. I finished my coffee. I went to work. I allowed the day to continue. Nothing collapsed. The world did not unravel because I failed to intervene right away. There were no emergencies. No dramatic consequences. Just silence followed later by a second message, then a third that sounded slightly sharper, asking if everything was all right and mentioning that I had been unusually quiet. I was quiet because I was observing. I began examining my own life with the same focus I used at work. My finances, my time, my energy. I saw how much of it had been quietly redirected outward. Money slipping away in small, steady amounts. Time kept flexible in case someone needed me. Plans left tentative because something might come up. So I made adjustments quietly. No announcements. No dramatic conversations. Just practical changes. I moved money into accounts that belonged only to me. I removed shared access. I stopped covering small payments that had never been openly discussed, only assumed. When my sister asked if I could help her out temporarily, I told her that I could not. I offered no explanation. I did not apologize. The reaction came quickly. My mother called, her voice tight with concern that felt more like confusion than care. She asked whether everything was all right and mentioned that I seemed distant lately. I answered honestly that I had simply been busy. She paused, clearly waiting for more. When I did not add anything, she reminded me that my sister was under significant pressure. I was aware of that. I had always been aware. What I was beginning to understand was that awareness did not automatically make it my obligation. That was the real turning point. There was no fight. No dramatic speech. Just the quiet realization that being labeled the strong one had allowed everyone else to set down their share of the weight. I did not realize then how quickly that boundary would be tested, but I was about to learn. The phone rang on a weekday afternoon just as I was wrapping up a meeting. I heard it before anyone actually explained anything. That sharp edge in my mom's voice, tight and rushed. The sound of someone trying to stay steady while the ground beneath her wasn't. She told me that we needed to talk and asked if I could come by that weekend. She gave no details. She did not need to. By then I understood the pattern. In my family, urgency without specifics always meant the same thing. Something had gone wrong. And it was usually expensive. When I got to Denver, the house felt heavier than I remembered. The air was stale. The living room table was buried under stacks of envelopes and scattered papers, bills, notices, official-looking printouts that were intimidating just to glance at. My sister sat stiff on the couch, arms crossed tightly, eyes locked on the floor. My dad avoided looking at me altogether. They did not ask how I was. They never do when there is a problem to fix. My mom started talking quickly, her words overlapping. A business decision that failed. Payments delayed. Contracts signed with hope and almost no margin for error. She kept repeating the word temporary, as if saying it enough times might turn it into truth. I listened without interrupting, hands folded neatly in my lap, just like always. Then came the pause. The shared inhale. The moment all of them looked at me. My dad cleared his throat and pointed out that I was in a stable position. He reminded me that I did not have children, and that I could handle something like this better than most people. There it was. The assumption. The expectation disguised as reasoning. They did not directly say that I should fix it, but they did not need to. The role had already been assigned. I was expected to close the gap, steady the crisis, make the numbers align the way I always had. My sister looked up at me then. Fear flickered across her face before shifting into something softer. Relief. As if the answer had just walked into the room. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I asked what the plan would be if I chose not to help. The room fell silent. Too silent. My mom looked wounded. My dad looked confused. My sister looked genuinely panicked. It was as though I had spoken in a language they did not recognize. Not helping had never been considered a possibility. I said calmly that I needed time to understand everything. They agreed too quickly, grateful and certain. They assumed time meant I was calculating how much I could contribute, not deciding whether I would at all. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom and staring at the ceiling, I felt something settle inside me. It was not anger. It was clarity. The next morning I scheduled 2 appointments, one with my therapist and one with a legal advisor. If I was going to step into this situation, it would not be as the family's automatic safety net. It would be on defined terms. When I returned the following weekend, I did not come back with easy answers. I came back with clarity. The house looked the same, but the atmosphere felt tighter, more desperate. The kind of quiet that belongs to people waiting to be saved. The papers were still spread across the table, though now sorted into piles, as if order alone could make the chaos manageable. Bills in one stack, payments in another, contracts clipped together, their corners bent from nervous handling. My parents were already seated. My sister sat beside them. Her husband hovered near the doorway, unsure whether he fully belonged in the room where the damage was being assessed. No one smiled when I walked in. No one offered coffee. My mom spoke first, saying they were really glad I came. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Her voice had that fragile softness I recognized, the tone she used when she needed something but did not want to ask directly. I sat down slowly and placed my bag at my feet. I said that we should talk. My dad cleared his throat and repeated the explanation I had already heard. The downturn, the delays, the bad timing. He spoke like someone presenting a case he had rehearsed all week, hoping steady delivery might replace accountability. My sister nodded along, her eyes glossy, occasionally adding comments about stress, the kids, and how none of this was supposed to unfold this way. Eventually, the explanations ran out. My mom leaned forward and said that they only needed help getting through this part. That once things stabilized, everything would improve. I asked how much. She blinked. My dad hesitated. My sister answered for them, saying a rounded number carefully, as if the way she pronounced it could make it sound smaller than it was. After that, I asked what the plan was. My dad frowned and asked what I meant. I clarified that I wanted to know what would change so this situation would not repeat itself. The question did not land well. My mom's expression tightened. She suggested that this was not the time to interrogate them. I nodded and replied that it was not the time for me to write a check either. The energy in the room shifted. My sister straightened and reminded me that we were family, that this was not about strategy but about helping. I asked who exactly I would be helping. She looked at me as if the answer were obvious and said that it was them. I looked around the room and asked who had been helping me. No one answered. My dad leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, and explained that I was in a different position. I did not have the same responsibilities. I was single. I was stable. I could afford to step in. There it was again. The lifelong logic. The equation that always ended with me absorbing the cost. I responded carefully that I could afford stability because I had spent years building my life as though no one would ever catch me if I fell. My mom's eyes filled with tears. She said they did not realize I felt that way. I met her gaze and told her they did know. They simply did not think it mattered. Silence returned, but this time it was not confusion. It was discomfort. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table between us slowly and deliberately. Every set of eyes followed it. I explained that this was what I was willing to do, and this was how I was willing to do it. My dad opened the folder first. His eyebrows drew together as he read the first page, then the next. My mom leaned over his shoulder. My sister leaned forward, her face losing color. He stated flatly that it was a loan. I confirmed that it was, with clear terms attached. My sister asked why there were conditions. I explained that this was not an emergency donation. It was structured assistance. My mom's voice trembled as she suggested that this meant I did not trust them. I answered quietly that I trusted patterns, and this particular pattern had existed for my entire life. The conditions were not cruel. They were not meant as punishment. They were practical. Before any money moved, assets had to be sold. Spending needed to be documented. No new financial commitments without proof they were sustainable. Family therapy was not a suggestion, it was a requirement. And there had to be a written agreement stating that my name, my credit, and my future would never again be treated as automatic backup. My dad pushed the folder away and said this felt cold, that this was how banks treated people. I nodded and told him that if they needed me to function like a bank, then they should treat me like one, because when they needed emotional support I was family, but when they needed money I became infrastructure. My sister's eyes filled with tears. She asked if I was punishing them now. I shook my head and said I was not punishing them, I was ending the punishment of myself. She looked at our parents and then back at me. She said that if I did not help, they would lose everything. I held her gaze and told her that if I helped without boundaries, I would lose everything I had built. The words stayed in the air between us, heavy and impossible to ignore. My mom reached toward my hand, then hesitated as though unsure whether she still had the right. She said they never meant to make me feel last. I gently pulled my hand back and reminded her that they did, and that they had even said it out loud. No one argued with that. My dad stared at the paperwork, his jaw tight, and said that this was it, that they either signed or sank. I corrected him and said this was not about signing or sinking, it was about growing or repeating. Time stretched. Minutes passed. My sister wiped her cheeks while her husband paced behind her. My parents leaned toward each other, whispering in low, urgent tones. For the first time in my life, I did not rush to fill the silence. I did not soften the edges. I simply waited. Finally, my dad looked up and said they needed time. I nodded and told them they had 24 hours. My sister's head snapped up, asking if that was all. I stood and said that was all, and that I would come back the next day. Either we would move forward under these terms, or we would not move forward at all. As I walked toward the door, my mom called my name. She asked, her voice breaking, whether I would walk away if they said no. I paused with my hand on the doorknob and told her I was not walking away from them. I was walking toward myself. The next day when I returned, the papers were signed. There were no speeches. No apologies disguised as explanations. Just shaky signatures and exhausted faces. The relief in the room was real, but so was the shift. Something had changed permanently. As I gathered my things, my sister looked at me differently than she ever had before. There was no superiority, no expectation, just uncertainty. And for the first time, that uncertainty was not mine to manage. The fallout did not come all at once. It arrived quietly, step by step. The first changes were practical. Assets were listed. Subscriptions were canceled. Expenses were tracked instead of ignored. The numbers stopped being abstract ideas and started becoming boundaries. My parents adjusted their expectations before they adjusted anything else, and that alone changed the tone of our conversations. Family therapy began a few weeks later. It was awkward at first, defensive. My dad chose his words carefully, as if afraid of misstepping. My mom cried more than she spoke. My sister sat stiff, arms crossed, as though accountability were a language she had never learned. I listened more than I talked. Not because I lacked words, but because I no longer needed to argue for my reality. It had already been written down, signed, and agreed upon. Over time, something unexpected happened. The panic faded. The urgency softened. Without me absorbing the consequences, everyone else had to carry their share. My sister learned to sit with discomfort instead of passing it along. My parents stopped using phrases like "we will figure it out" when what they really meant was that I would figure it out. The relationship did not heal in some dramatic, cinematic way. There were no sudden transformations. But there was space. Space where guilt once lived. Space where obligation had pressed against my chest. Back in Seattle, my life felt steadier. Lighter. I focused on my work. I slept better. I stopped bracing myself every time my phone buzzed. When my mom called, she asked how I was, not what I could fix. When my sister texted, it did not come with an attached request. But the biggest change was not theirs. It was mine. I no longer felt responsible for protecting the illusion that everything was fine. I stopped proving my worth by solving problems that were never mine to begin with. I learned that boundaries do not erase love. They define where love can exist without destroying you. One evening, sitting alone in my apartment, I realized something simple and profound. For the first time in my life, I was not waiting to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. And that changed everything. For years, I believed that being last in my family meant I had to try harder, give more, stay smaller. I was wrong. Being last was never a position worth competing for. It was a sign to step out of the line entirely and build a life where my value was not measured by sacrifice. If this story feels uncomfortably familiar, I want you to know that you are not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you are listening from. And if stories like this help you breathe a little easier, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next.